I mean, I think the ultimate question is, do you really believe that King Von could have been hip hop's first serial killer?
Yeah, I mean, I guess what I say to that is, would we ever really know, actually, this side of heaven or hell?
Davion Bennett, also known as King Von, was one of the prominent members of the drill scene in Chicago. King Von was shot and killed 3 years ago in 2020 during an altercation in Atlanta, Georgia. He was 26 years old. And King Von is from the notorious O Block, also known as Parkway Gardens. Today's episode, we listen to his most recent project that was released this last week. I made mom listen to it, and today we wanted to talk about all of the controversy revolving King Von. As some of you may know, King Von is considered to be possibly hip hop's first serial killer. None of this is completely confirmed, but there's a lot of pieces that have led a lot of people to believe that this could
Hmm.
be true. So,
Yep. So, welcome to episode 2, season 3.
so
Yeah,
I had you listen to this project.
yeah, you did.
What are your initial thoughts?
Yeah, so this album, released posthumously, I think what they call it after his death, was a compilation of stuff he had recorded prior to death, and it was done by several artists. And I like listening to all kinds of music, and I like listening to rap. Rap's not my favorite genre of music. However, I can definitely appreciate its place in the music scene as well as culturally. I will say that this album in particular was difficult to listen to. There's a lot that goes into my feelings about that. And let me say this, because Josh and I did talk about this. Everything we share for the next 25, 30 minutes on this is really, 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 really limited in its perspective because Josh and I are very white. We've grown up in the suburbs of what is considered a relatively and was relatively safe city. We never lived in Chicago. We've never dealt with the level of poverty, gang violence, gang necessity, survival that this artist grew up with.
Hmm.
And so we have a very, very limited perspective on what it's like to be in that space and what it means to survive in that space. So,
And I also want to clarify another piece of this. Davion Bennett, King Von, is no longer with us. So
right.
this is not meant to be in any form disrespectful or, to disrespect his memory, I
Yeah,
guess.
right.
It's more from a third person perspective of listening to the music. Obviously, mom said she doesn't listen to a lot of hip hop and rap, but I do. And I'm surrounded by a lot of people that are in the industry and make this music. So
Hmm.
I have a little bit of a different perspective when it comes to like listening and being able to hear it for what it is, even though like she said, I've never lived that lifestyle. I've gotten in plenty of trouble, but nothing to the sort of what
Yeah,
these
no.
people have grown up and lived with. So,
Well, and I think, Josh, you listen to this music from a peer level.
hmm.
This artist, King Von, is actually the same age as Josh's oldest sister, Addie, who happens to be 29 now. So I listen to it from a parent perspective, from a mom perspective, because that's how those generational lines fall out for me in that. And so listening to this album, I'm also really sensitive to topics. So like I don't love horror movies. I don't watch them. I'm sensitive from an empathetic standpoint to the plight of humans and people, and it's hard for me to take that in. Like it has an effect on me. So listening to this album was difficult in the sense that I see the struggle behind where somebody ends up in their life that you would be rapping about what they believe is to be potentially true stories of, murdering and killing people to survive, to
Hmm.
rob somebody for money to pay the bills, to, and a lot of it is vengeance, but a lot of it is this survival thing that is underneath. And humans have long had that deep, deep thing where we all do what we have to do to survive. And so I don't know what it's like to be in an environment where, in order for me to survive, it requires, or I believe it requires me to kill another person or to protect my territory or rob somebody.
I
I
th
don't know what that's like.
Yeah, I think an interesting piece to this story, again, for those of you listening, you can do your own research. You can go
Mm-hmm.
watch and look up as much as you want about King Vaughn and his story in Chicago and this area. I mean, King Vaughn is from, like I said, a specific spot in Chicago, a specific project called Parkway Gardens, also known as O Block, which rivals another area literally block away where the GDs or the gangster disciples are. So there's been like a war basically. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that the interesting part about Vaughn's story, and all of this is speculation, but a lot of people believe that it crossed this threshold of killing or doing this stuff to survive and moved into a spot of like doing it for the thrill,
Yeah, for sure.
which is where I have a lot of like questions that will never be answered, like you said,
Right.
about the psychological side of things and
Yeah.
like where this stems from, like, how he got to where he was. And I mean, it's all speculation again, but he's said to have killed at least 10 people over the course of 10 years. So
Right. And when you listen to some of these songs, you do really question whether, when he's rapping about it, it's like,
is it fictional?
is it
Or
fictional also? But if it is real, was it out of necessity or was it just out of trying to establish a reputation so that people feared him? Like, what
or just
was,
simply the thrill to
or
kill?
just the thrill to kill? Exactly. And I think that's one of the things that's interesting in talking about it is, I was looking up some of the history of gang life and activity in Chicago because it is one of the places, and we all know this from the news, that has a really high gang activity rate, crime
Murder
rate,
rate.
as well as murder rate, right? So it is one of the higher ones. And what's interesting about that is I read Michelle Obama's book, and she grew up in Chicago in these areas, right? And
I think she's
obviously,
actually from Parkway Gardens,
yeah, I
O
think she
Block.
is. Yeah. So she obviously grew up in the heart of this whole thing. And she talks a lot in her memoir and in her book about how this environment came to be. And what happened was this great migration from, so previous to even African American, Black, Latino, like these different cultures and people groups that moved into this area, gangs were already pretty well established in the very early 1900s. And those were amongst the mafia, and those are amongst white people. We know that. Al Capone was in Chicago. Like,
Hmm.
this was happening in the very early 1900s. So that gang lifestyle was already ingrained in the culture of Chicago long before these other groups moved in. And now
Hmm.
there's some, they say, estimated around like 70 different gangs in this, space,
Hmm.
notoriously this area being the biggest. But she talks about this great migration that came north of workers. And when they came to Chicago to work in the factories, they wouldn't hire Black people. And so then what they started to do after that, which if you've studied the history of race and politics in America, you'll know that the banks began to redline certain areas of the city where they wouldn't loan on home ownership. And so again, there became this
And that's where these
massive,
projects derive from.
correct, there became this massive effort to actually keep people from succeeding. So people, men that were willing to work and work hard and just wanted to make a living to take care of their families, were being denied high paying jobs, being denied even decent paying jobs, were being denied the ability to buy in areas of the city that were safe. And so it was pushing all of these people into these very depressed communities and areas.
Hmm.
And within that became this deep sense and need of survival.
Hmm.
And so the gangs began to develop as a way of protecting
The
the
communities within.
communities, these communities of family groups and stuff within these areas, because violence was running, the show, and people were desperate to survive and make money, and you couldn't get a good job. And like Michelle Obama talks about that. She talks about her dad having like a decent job and his work to try to move his family out of those spaces and out of that place. But if you didn't have those resources, you were essentially stuck. So the gang lifestyle that exists today, which a lot of people, like you were just saying, thinks maybe has morphed more into the thrill area, was actually necessity, but it's generations deep. And
Yeah,
that's that we were talking about on the last podcast. That's the epigenetics of decisions that previous generations make, maybe even out of necessity, but then begin to roll into the next generations. And those traumas and those things are not addressed. And then they begin to morph and change.
right. Yeah, I mean, there's these generational like rivalries between these
Correct.
gangs.
Yeah.
Specifically with this episode, we're talking about Vaughn, O Block, and he talks a lot in his music, like not being from 63rd, and like talks a lot about, different people that were killed over the years. And essentially, O Block, the BDs, and the GDs, this has been generational.
Yeah, it has.
This has been something that's been going on for a long time. And I don't know if there's even a way that that'll ever be mended. I don't see how this can be kind of fixed because, I mean, these are family members, children, brothers, sisters, cousins that are being killed on each side. For those of you that have lost
Right.
family members or close friends, or there's a lot of emotion
Yeah, for
involved.
sure.
And
Well, and a lot of
how do you
anger and a lot of
how do you move past that?
rage and vengeance and, hanging on to grudges, and rightfully so. But it's a strange thing because humanity on a whole has set this in motion, and like we're failing one another miserably, right? As we continue to try to
In this
fight for
music,
survival, I
the
guess.
drill scene that started in Chicago has, in my opinion, made it 10 times worse.
Mm,
Because you take somebody being killed and then on top of that, put out a song where you're
right,
basically pissing on their memory and talking about, for example,
right.
if you go listen to his music or you listen to any other Chicago artist music like that's in that drill scene, you'll hear numerous times we're smoking on Tuka or we're smoking on, like, essentially saying that they're putting this dead person's memory in a wood and smoking on it.
Right.
And that, in my mind, is
Well, they're flaunting it and then disrespecting it. And the thing is the ego takes over in all of those situations, right? And when somebody does that, you just want revenge. And
and
so that cycle of revenge continues.
that takes me back then to the question about, like, is it survival or is it for the thrill now? Like, is it like,
Well,
because
the
they're
thrill
sitting
in
there
the
flaunting.
ego,
If you look up the traits of a
right?
serial killer, you know what I'm talking about? Like, they need trophies and they like to
Right,
flaunt their victories. And
right.
like, that's where I wonder. And I've watched a 4-hour documentary, Trapper Ross, or something along those lines, I believe. But he put out a 4-hour documentary. I have no clue how he got all this information. He had screenshots of tweets from 2011, 2012, like way back then, that are no longer up anywhere. He had all this information basically describing, he went into depth about like time periods. So like seeing when Vaughn and his people were tweeting out different stuff, and he put it all together. And if you go watch it, there's no doubt in my mind that a lot of this is truth.
Yeah, sure.
I mean,
Well, I mean, it probably is, right? Like, again, yeah, I mean, you look at the environment and what it was creating, and then you look at the justifications behind the decisions, and whether the justifications were legitimate or whether they're just rolling on a history that's deep with this kind of like fanciful idea of protection. So it's like, oh, I'm doing this because I'm protecting my loved ones. And it's like, but are you? Because you're bringing more harm to your loved ones as you continue to repeat this pattern than anything. And
Hmm.
he definitely doesn't shy away in this music. Like there's a couple songs where you almost go, you see maybe a sliver of
Like,
humanity in him where he's like, I want out, but at the same time, I can never get out.
it's
I
so
never
deep.
will get out. I like know too much. I've done too much. I've seen too much. Like you can try to get me out because he talks about that, like as he started to make money and as he started to be known. And it's like he says, like, you can take me out of there, but you'll never take that out of me.
Yeah.
So it's like he almost doesn't even want to leave it behind. It's so much a part of his identity and what he's grown up believing is who he is that he can't separate that side of him out. And he keeps saying, like, I'll never stop. Like, you come for me and I'm going to kill you. Like, I'm
I
not going to
think
stop. So,
I think that's the sad part though. So often people identify themselves with like a certain way of life that they were used to,
right,
or like certain decisions they've made, or
right,
when you have an opportunity, you're in a position where, and again, I mean, I can't speak to it in the sense of like personal understanding or what,
right,
because I don't know the politics within what it looks like to try to walk away from it, and you know what
correct.
I mean? But to an extent, and I think there's plenty of rappers, I think there's plenty of people that are living proof that you can
Yeah, you
step
can.
away from that life. You
Well,
can
it
find
takes,
another way.
I think it's like any of us, right? If you want to get out of something, you have to change everything around you. You can't stay connected and dabbling in it. You
Yeah.
you have to completely
Yeah, I mean, matter of
disassociate and disconnect yourself from it. And if you're not willing to do that, you're never actually going to get out of it. So and that goes for any situation. Now, granted, again, back to this limited perspective. I'm saying it like it's so easy. It's not. It's never easy. And I don't know the specific challenges that come with that environment because I have a set of privileges I didn't have to overcome those things. But what I can say, and what we've talked about a lot, is that when you are empowered enough in your own mind to realize that you always have a choice, then things become optional versus a requirement. If you think you don't have a choice, you've already determined that you're stuck. And that's kind of like this mark between I think the people that are like, "No, I want out. I have a choice. Okay, now what how do I do it?" versus the people that say, "No, I'll never get out." And then there's a part of them that's like, "Do I even want to get out?" And then you start to say like, "Well, I don't have a choice." And then you've now basically tied yourself to that. You've
completely limit your options.
correct. And he sounds like when you listen to some of his songs, like that's definitely what he's saying is like, these things are happening. I'm making money. I have money now. But even though I have money now, I'm still blowing it in a way that it's not doing me any good. Like he's still saying, like, I'm not going to be anything other than this, this person that was raised in this environment, this person that is committed to killing as a method of protection, this person that believes that I can't pay my bills, that my lights are going to be shut off. I even have the money now and I'm still blowing it on shit that doesn't matter. Like
Hmm.
he, it's that psychological side of trauma that you experience growing up that shapes the way that you view the outcome of your life. And ultimately, for him, that meant the outcome of his life was never going to lead him to a long life. And it didn't. He
Well, and
died
I
at
think
26. He knew that that was going to be part of
I think this almost goes
that.
like kind of hand in hand with the last episode
Yeah,
we
it
did
does. It does actually, very much. I don't
with
disagree with you.
Dr. Mate,
Yeah.
speaking on trauma and how that trauma affects the next and the
Yeah,
next
the
and then
epigenetics of
like,
generational trauma.
I mean,
And
King Vaughn's father passed away when he was very young, and from my understanding, His father was incarcerated for most of his growing up,
And then he was killed when
and then he
King
was
Von was
killed
11.
when he was like 11.
And
Um,
isn't the timeline that King Von killed his first person at 14?
Something like that, yeah.
Like
I mean,
they think like
yeah,
maybe even younger, 12?
well, and from my understanding, again, like, I think that that loss, from what I've seen, had such a substantial impact on him that that's
Yeah,
what kind of drove him into that lifestyle.
sure, deeper for sure.
And the other part that's really wild is, this is kind of a side note, but like, I was looking into like all of this, and these kids that were killing each other and stuff, they all went to like school together.
Yeah,
Like,
right.
they're all within a couple block radius. Like, these
Yeah,
are people that they know well, went to school with, and
yeah.
they're rivals within school. You know, there's like, I forgot where it was. I was listening to an interview. It might have been, it was, maybe it was Chief. I don't know. Another artist that he went to school with was talking about how King Von was like the first one to be bringing like pipes to school, pipes as in firearms and stuff. And then
Mm,
they're like, oh, so it's like, it's up now. Like, we're doing this at school through, and it just progressed as time went on.
sure.
If you go back and look at the history of like this rivalry between these BDs and GDs and this drill scene, the hip hop, the rap, there's only a handful, three, four artists that are still alive at this
Mm,
point. The majority of these guys, I mean, the ones being alive being like Lil Durk, Chief Keef, the majority of these other guys were killed over the years. I forgot the specific number. I looked at it like a couple years ago. I was looking at it. There was
yeah.
dozens and dozens of these artists, and over time they've slowly just.
Yeah, I mean, I think as I sit and think about it as like a mom, right? It's so difficult to look at from a parent perspective, right? Because again, I can't judge the life that I never had to live. Like I don't know what it's like to be a parent in that scenario. I don't know what it's like to feel like that is the option that you have and that
You're
you're
stuck.
you're stuck, right? What I do know is that if there's anything that can move the needle on getting people to choose to move away from that environment, it has to be hope, right? If
Hmm.
you strip people of hope, if you tell people like you're never going to have a job that's going to pay you enough, you're never going to get out of this neighborhood, this is all your life is chalked up to being. If you already feel like you're on the losing side of everything, then really what happens is you get into this mentality, which is like, well, what else do I have to lose then? I might as well roll the dice out here and at least I can get what I want or what I think I need in the moment temporarily, because what other hope is there? And I guess that's the part of it that's like so difficult for me to wrap my head around from a humanity standpoint. Like, what the fuck are we doing? Stripping people of hope, like creating environments where we just basically say, like, your worth and your value is like this. So good luck. And then when they live the lifestyle that like he was living, then we sit back in our armchairs and we say like, oh, what a shame. Can you imagine living like that? And like, this is such a problem. And it's like, well, okay, but on the flip side of that, we just created that problem.
We're all contributing.
100%.
And I think that's something we've talked about before. I mean, again, I didn't grow up gangbanging or doing any of this, and I definitely didn't grow up in Chicago where I had to be fearful to step out of my home every day and so
Right,
on.
right.
From my limited knowledge and speaking with people I know and so on, there's only so much each of us can do, right? But coming together and being able to, like, each of us do a little bit to
Right.
try to make a difference or try to,
Yeah.
have some sort of impact. I mean, again, back to the episode from last week, if we were all able to process through our own traumas, this world would be such a better place. I
Right.
mean,
If
we
we
wouldn't
had the
have stories
encouragement,
like this.
yeah, if everybody could tap into the encouragement that it's possible for anybody to work through those things, and then also if people could tap into having just even one person that can be setting an example or leading the way or being just a few steps ahead to give you some hope that it's possible and that you can do it, and it will lead you to a different way of being and a different life, I think we would be more likely to see people doing it, right? Like, I remember when you boys were in high school and like talking to a lot of your friends, and this wasn't directed to you, it was directed to your friends, you know? I used to say all the time, I don't know if you remember this, you have to be smarter than the system that's set up against you.
Yeah, and
Because,
just to clarify, she's not talking about the system set up against me.
yeah, no, that's what I'm saying. This
Mo
wasn't to
Most of
you.
my friends are,
Mixed.
yeah, mixed
Yeah,
or
mixed and
black,
have
Hispanic.
different ethnic backgrounds and are not white
Yeah,
as day. Like
yeah.
white isn't what's white as day? Is that no, that might not be it,
I don't know.
but whatever.
Like white like this wall.
White like this wall.
No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, exactly.
Sorry,
No,
keep going
but
though.
that's what I would say to them. You know, they'd be in my home and I would watch them and I would constantly remind them, like, look, you guys are capable of being smarter than the system that's set up against you. And be sure of it. It is set up against you. And you will fail if you think you can roll in that system the way they want you to, because it's not set for you to survive. It's not set for you to stay out of jail. It's not set for you to succeed. It's literally set against you. I'm not going to argue that with people. That's the conclusion I've come to from my own research and experience in my life and what I've seen.
Well, and I've seen it firsthand.
Yeah,
Even dealing
exactly.
with the legal system,
Yeah,
like
that's right.
a perfect example in my mind of like where I've
Yeah,
had
you've
an
caught a lot of
advantage.
breaks
I've
and a
caught a
lot of
lot of breaks
privilege.
and I've seen a lot of friends that haven't.
Yep.
I mean, again, we've gone in a lot of different directions with this episode, but I think that like one of the biggest questions again that I don't know if we'll ever have an answer to, I'm so curious to understand if there's more to the story with Vaughn specifically. Like again, the psychology behind it, if there's more there than just the trauma and the way he was raised and so on. Because when you talk about a quote unquote serial killer,
Yeah.
there's typically more there than circumstances.
Well, there is, but actually, when you like read about them and learn about them, it all usually derives back to childhood trauma. Like, it's very rare that you have somebody that was like, no, they grew up in this great environment and like there was no trauma and everything was fine. And they just literally have like a mental break and like murder people. Like, especially from a serial perspective, that might happen on a one off.
Yeah.
But from a consistent desire or need to kill people as a way of being, which is what a serial killer is, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm uncertain that I know of any that don't have some sort of really fucked up, messed up trauma back in the beginning days of their lives.
Yeah, I mean, I
And
don't know enough serial
yeah,
killers,
I've
but
read
from
enough
what
and
I
watched
do
enough.
know and have seen, a lot of them went through some pretty fucked up shit
Yeah,
that created this like
correct. It breaks your brain.
hmm
Yeah, I mean, that's a real thing. The brain is developing at a young age, right? Like,
well, and then I think
deep
once
development is taking place.
I I do believe that there's like this like hesitation when it starts, and then there's like a numbing effect.
Oh, for
You know
sure.
what I mean? Like
For sure.
I would have to believe that if any of this is true, there was some hesitation there, and then there's a point where he may have just become numb to that lifestyle and what was
Right.
happening.
Well, if that's what you think all your life is gonna, that's all your life is worth, and that's what it's gonna be, then yeah, you give yourself over to that and you buy in, right? Because that's it.
hmm
And I think that song the one, I'm gonna look it up because I don't
Was it on
remember
the
the name of
project?
it. Yeah, on the project. I think that song that basically he's talking about like getting out. I think that's the song that has the most reflection.
From the Hood?
Yeah, from the hood.
hmm This is in the middle of the project, I think.
That one, yeah, and then the out of the streets.
Out of the Streets, yeah.
Yeah, like those are the two, and then the family dedication too, the
At the
one at the
end,
end.
yeah.
Like those are the only songs that in there I think you hear a moment of reflection, and that's the part of it that makes me wonder if it was so much that he's a sociopath and like he's just, doing this from a broken brain, or if it was more of a, this is all my life's going to be. So if this is all my life's going to be, then I'm going to do it full on.
Yeah.
Right? Like that line between if
Shit, I mean, I guess if you're gonna do anything, do it full-heartedly.
well, right? Like, but that's the thing is it's like that's almost the way he's looking at it because even as he starts to make his way out of it and you get that little bit of reflection like out of the streets, he pretty much says like you're never going to take that out of me. It is who I am.
Mm-hmm.
And that to me is almost like basically where you have pretty much accepted the place you have in life and you don't believe that there's anything else for you.
Which isn't
And that's
true.
a lack of hope, right? Right
Yeah.
there. That's this idea that there's no more hope. This is it. This is all I got.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you can hear that in that. I think that's the little moments where you start to think like, at least for me as a mom, where it's like, nobody ever gave you the reality that that didn't have to be all you were. And
There's
by
hope.
then, and it could be that by the time he started to get that little bit of hope, and here's another part of this, he was already deep into having murdered so many people. It's like, well, how do I leave that behind?
Yeah.
This has already defined me.
Because he was acquitted of a murder in like 2014 or something.
Yeah, like,
The year after he died, they
yeah.
confirmed that he was the killer.
Yeah, well, and I think
So-
that he was up on charges even when he was like 16 or something.
Yeah.
So again, I think at that point, like,
Well, I think I think he beat like 2 murder charges and 2 attempted murder charges.
probably. Yeah, I didn't read that part, but I guess the point is that if hope was delivered to him that life could be different, it was delivered after he was already so
was too
deep
far.
in that you're like, how do I become somebody different when I've already killed X amount of people and I know it personally? And that's where hope has to start when they're so young. That's where we have to start feeding into them at such a young age that there's more to this
Most
life.
important years of your
Correct.
existence
Yep.
when you're really developing and figuring out.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, I think we've touched quite a bit. I want to clarify once again, though, all of this conversation is speculation. None
Yeah.
of this is anything that we can confirm or know for truth. I mean, there's a lot of stuff out there on the internet. There's a lot of stories. There's a lot of people saying different things, and we simply wanted to react to this project and talk about our thoughts in regards to King Von and his story.
Yeah, and I'll say personally, just from my perspective, like I had no clue who this was until yesterday, right? And then
Yeah, I kind of just threw this one on her. We were
Yeah.
actually going to react to Gunna's project that he released, but I figured this was more recent.
yeah, that was a little late because we'd listened to that several weeks ago, but I didn't know anything. So like my reaction to this is simply from listening to what he put in his lyrics and then a tiny bit of like quick research I did to read a little bit about this album and
Yeah.
what it took to put this out.
And the minimal stuff that I told you.
Yeah, the minimal stuff that Josh told me, and then also just a little bit of like history and research I know about Chicago and some of the things that, have been set up for generations that have kept that area in the position that it's been in and have added to the gang warfare there and the depressed state of being and the struggles that have occurred. So all of this speculation and just is coming straight from observation of what I'm hearing, what I see, and the little bit that I know. And I don't think it's far off. That's the craziest part, right? I think there's some obvious things there and what we know about, trauma and history and how it sets people up. So
Yep. Well,
we got to do better.
yeah, we do got to
I
do
mean,
better. If there's
ultimately-
one message to leave, it's, have hope. Know that whatever circumstances you're in, whatever life you've grown up living, like there's always opportunity. There's always a chance to change. There's always opportunity for better. Just
Yeah.
have hope. So,
Yeah, you got to tap into hope. You got to tap into recognizing that what you grew up in does have a profound impact and it's worth diving in and working on and healing and dealing with. And then you always have a choice.
yep.
as we've always said, like the minute you start believing you no longer have a choice is the minute that you're trapped in whatever situation you're finding yourself in. So if you can hang on to the idea that you always have a choice and be creative enough to try to find what that choice is and to keep fighting for that, you have options.
Yep. That being said, that
Yeah.
is episode 22, episode 2 of season 3. We appreciate you guys if you stayed with us this whole time.
Yeah.
Let us know in the comments what you guys think. If you're listening on Spotify, Apple, rate the podcast. We appreciate it. And then obviously, again, if you're on YouTube, drop a like and don't forget to subscribe. This is going to be another kind of form of what we're doing with this podcast now,
Yep.
reacting to music and stuff every month. So if you enjoyed, make sure to come back.
And next month, I'm picking the album.
Next month, she's picking the album. So
So stay tuned.
we will catch you guys next time.
Peace.
Don't do stupid shit.
Don't do it.